Hi everyone, blessings. My name is Lacey Dawn Jackson, the Groovy Green Goddess, and you are tuning into me right here on 12radio.com. It is Thursday after the eclipse. How did the eclipse, how'd you like it? Do you feel a difference? I certainly started feeling the energy, oh my goodness, a good couple weeks prior to it coming in. August has been such a transformative month for many of us. I know it has been for me. Lots of changes and endings of relationships and beginnings of new projects and just a lot of good things. And sometimes we have to remember that if things seem to be a little chaotic, that it's needed for us to rise up and get out of our comfort zone and to really pay attention to our own spiritual journey. So if you're here listening to me today, you may already know that I have been doing a series on the mysteries of the lost lands. And the lost lands are Lemuria, Atlantis, and Avalon. And if you are interested in watching me, talk about these lost lands and the information that I have around that, you can certainly go to Groovy Green Goddess fan page on Facebook. And you can also watch me in the private chat room, which is over at Facebook as well, and it is the 12 Radio private chat room. And you can watch me, or you can go over to 12 Radio and click on the listen button, and there's an app, so you can actually listen to any of our shows over here at 12 Radio on your phone. I think that's great. That's technology. And a couple weeks ago, I started with a test to figure out what lost land you resonate with the most. And so we started that you can find in my archives at the over at 12 Radio, and it's marked accordingly. Take a test. And last week I talked about Lemuria. This week, I am going to talk about Atlantis. All right. So we have lots of information to cover. And, I found that it was a little challenging for me to get in the nuts and bolts of Atlantis. There certainly have been times of my life where I have resonated with Atlantis, but I certainly resonate a lot more with Lemuria and more recently, Avalon. So to go back and visit Atlantis is, it reminded me of what's going on today in our world. Seriously, we are living in Atlantis today with all the political uprising, all the just stuff going on around the world. I'm not gonna, I started to go there and start mentioning different things that's happening, but this is not a time for that. This is about the history of the lost lands, one of them being Atlantis. But just remembering some of my past lives regressions that I have experienced over the years and going into Atlantis, and also reading books on the different memories that others have of Atlantis really resonated with me. And I've got to mention one of the books where I love Lucy Cavendish. She is an Aussie and an Aussie witch, and I think she's just lovely. Her oracle cards are very magical, and I am getting a lot of this information that I'm sharing with you from one of her books, The Lost Lands. And I chose that because she puts a lot of information that I resonated with so much years ago when I read her book. It just resonated with me, and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I've experienced this. Oh my gosh, this is something that I have remembered when I've gone into a past life. And I have really my first love of getting into all of this spiritual stuff, and the getting to know thyself on a deeper level really started when I was aware of like my past lives and studying my past lives. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I certainly have had a few memories during my past life regressions of Atlantis and being of service in Atlantis. So I will share that with you later in the broadcast. But you know what time it is? It's time for a drink of water. Doing all this talking makes me thirsty. So before we get started, I have so much information to give you, but I just want to let you know that this show here is brought to you by Juice Plus, and I will put a link to Juice Plus in the chat room of the 1-2 Radio chat room under my mug that Scott, my producer, puts up during the show. And as you have already maybe guessed, this is pre-recorded, and I realized on Sunday that I was going to be traveling on Thursday, and I didn't really take that into consideration when I decided I was going to do this series. And I thought, wow, how can I do this series? I thought, well, I would just take all my recording stuff and go and just hope for the best that the internet works. And then as I was meditating yesterday, I got the message, Lacey, why can't you just record the show, and you can still do a Facebook Live thing, and you can play it, and you can be in the chat room, and I don't have to worry about having that stress of wondering if I'm going to get good internet in a place that I am not familiar with. So I will be, at the time of this recording, I will be up in Port Townsend, which is a sea town in Washington State, and I'm at the Phoenix Rising bookstore doing readings all week long. So if you are in the area, go ahead and give me a call. If you're not in the area, you can always get a hold of me over at 12listen.com. That's where I've been working on the psychic hotline for over 10 years, and I just love it over there. Some of my best friends are over there. We have got to know each other through the years, and we definitely are not in competition, but we are in compassion and love for one another, and we have a common thread, and that thread is to help you to become your best and authentic self. So I would encourage you, if you've never looked at 12listen.com, I would invite you to go over there and see who you resonate with. Read our profiles and give us a call, and we can help you with whatever you're going through. And we're always having sales, so really sign up over there on the site, and you will be privy first and foremost of the sales, because we are. Our boss, Mark Hesson, he's always putting on sales, and we love that when that happens. So I hope that you will give it a try sometime. And yeah, anyway, let's go to Atlantis. Okay, so last week we talked about Lemuria, and I had so much more to share on Lemuria, but we can only share so much in an hour a time. And so I kind of ended abruptly, and I ended when the sea was rising and the land was changing, and so the Lemurians had to move, and some of the Lemurians, because of the ability to shapeshift and the ability to really utilize their magic and the crystal magic and stuff that they had within them, that they chose to either become part of the land, or they chose to go into the sea as mer people. And they also, some of them felt the call to travel long ways away to the big land of Atlantis. All right. So Atlantis is known to be primarily in the Atlantic Ocean, and whereas Lemuria is more in the Pacific Ocean. Okay, now Atlantis, much like Lemuria, was all over the earth. There were stations, or there were land masses that were also Lemurian. There were land masses that were definitely Atlantis. Even as far as the four corners of the United States. And, maybe somebody could put this in the chat room, but I forgot to look up and see what states were the four corners, but I know that they are down southwest of me, and I'm in Washington State. But the four corners was known for being a station for the Atlanteans, and this was thousands and thousands of years ago. And what is known now is, if you listen to some of the elders in the Native American traditions, they will tell you of a story of Atlantis and Lemuria. Now, they may have different names. I'm sure that they do have different names than what we have called Atlantis or Lemurian, but they definitely have their stories as far as some of the happenings that took place. And it's very interesting, but that's that area is I think it's the Hopi tribe that have some of the stories in that area, as far down as into Mexico too. There are some legends and stories of the Lemurian and the Atlantean times, and being visited, or knowing their ancestors, knowing that there was a different way of life at the time. So the Hopi tribe, they will utilize their Akashic records to remember this, just like some of the other tribes throughout the world will utilize the Akashic memories, the records, and go into the past and get this information. So Atlantis was also, I've had this big pull to go to Santorini in Greece at some point, because it's known that that's where some of Atlantis was, and possibly where the mother city was. Now, Atlantis was much like we are on Earth. Let's see a comparison. Well, Atlantis, they had different cities, just like we do, in different areas of the world. And so we were spread out. Atlantis was spread out. And it is known that there is this there was a big, like, mothership of a city. That's probably not the best phrase to use, since even though there was galactic communication, Atlantis was, a city on Earth, but there certainly were galactic beings a part of it, but there was this big, huge city. And in this city of Atlantis, or the big city, let's see, I have it written here what that city is called, and I can't find it right now. I have so many notes. But this city was very powerful. It had big, like pyramids and big towers, not like the Lemurians, where the Lemurians resonated with circles and built things in circles and kept things very simple in circles, and knew that their magic would be very powerful within the circle. Whereas Atlantis, that's where the pyramids come from different areas of the world. Where you find the old pyramids and stuff was the Atlantean times, where the pyramids were built up because they wanted to get as much power as possible. Atlanteans were into power and technology. Now, doesn't that remind you of some place we live now? So we are experiencing this Atlantis in this day and age. We really, truly are. So the city is, the biggest city is called Poseidon. Okay, and this is where all the crystal pyramids, or the biggest towers, sat, and the city was powered by. This is where a lot of the pyramids and stuff. Whereas you see pyramids and magic structures, or spiritual structures all over the world now, you only see parts of them because they've been destroyed or fallen into the sea. But this city was primarily made of towers, and it was like the electric grid, per se, to give this power to all the other cities all over the world. And much like, we have these power stations all over to make sure that we have electricity. Now, these power pyramids and towers were crystal generated. There were crystals underneath the ground of them throughout the towers. So the crystal were definitely a conduit to the other power stations all over that also had crystals and stuff. So different than the Lemurians. The Lemurians carried their crystals and their stones as a part of them, and many Lemurians had them, their stone, whatever stone their clan took care of and held sacred, was also placed in their third eye. And Whereas the Atlanteans, they didn't have that. They were a little bit. When the Lemurians started arriving in the Atlantean cities, because of the sea rising and their land being destroyed, some of them had a very hard time acclimating because of the Lemurians were so simple and love-filled. And the Atlanteans were very powerful. They were very beautiful. They resembled Greek gods. They dressed, very in white and pristine and clear and clean. And they were very, very, they put off this energy of being very powerful. And the Lemurians noticed also that the Atlanteans didn't always agree with one another, that they had different philosophies, whereas the Lemurians, they were very much of one mind and of one focus, and that was love and healing and just living in contentment with the animals and the different creatures that were roaming around at the time. Whereas the Atlanteans, it was like a galactic paradise. It was almost futuristic. And that reminds me of one of my last past life regressions. I went up to a girlfriend who had studied past life regression with one of her teachers that is a specialist in past life regression, and she wanted to practice on me. And so we recorded it, we videotaped it. And it wasn't until I was really getting into some of my research in the last couple months on the Lost Lands that it dawned on me that this past life regression at the time, when I came out of it, Lisa, my friend, was going, oh my gosh, did you go into a future? And that's what, when I was talking about it and explaining things going on, I thought I was in the future. And so I took it as being a future life, because I definitely believe that we can go into a future life. And whether we believe in past life for, whatever it is that we are wanting to learn from our past lives or future lives. Some believe that it is something that is happening simultaneously as we live in this life. And you know what? That makes sense to me. There are so many different things that we can look at there. And I don't want to go too much into the past life theory and stuff. But when we rewatched the video and when I was talking in the video, what was going on was I was in this very futuristic paradise. It was paradise, and I felt really good. And, and this was much like the Atlantis feel. And I even mentioned Atlantis, that this was much like, this was what Atlantis was. And I was taking turns. There were, it was like not on the ground, but it was up in the sky. So it was very futuristic, and there were these little pods. Actually, they were big pods because, several people could go into these pods at the same time. But these pods, there were tunnels to the pods. And so you would go through a tunnel, and one specific pod would be just focused on rose quartz. And there would be rose quartz walls, and everything was rose quartz. And you would go in there, and it was like you were re-energizing your chakra system. And then when you were done, you would leave in another a doorway tunnel, a tube, and go into the next tube, which might be a room of crystal. And so you would sit there and get all this crystal energy, and you would go into, and there were 7 main ones, which maybe is attributed to, the 7 chakras that we primarily focus on. But there were all these little chutes and little tunnels going into smaller rooms off of each of the bigger temple or room with the 7 different stones. So it was really interesting. When I came out of the past life, I was so energized. I really had a hard time grounding myself. We had to do a grounding meditation, but I was so excited. But I didn't realize I had taken it as a future, something in the future, and realizing as I'm going into this study of the Atlantean ways that it was definitely something that took place in the city of Atlantis, and it was something that the healers, or it seemed that not everyone was privy to doing this, but getting this power, getting this re-energizement to go and work with others. So it was very interesting. I've had another lifetime where I was responsible, one of the people, there were many of us responsible for holding these huge points of crystals that were like as big as they were like giant pencils that now we couldn't lift up by ourselves, but in the memory that I had, I was lifting these up by myself. So certainly there was some of that energy and that power that we had in the Atlantean times that we all had if we experienced living in Atlantis. And I really get, and this may not resonate with you, but I really get that we all have, whether we lived a time in Atlantis or one of our or more of our ancestors lived in the time of Atlantis. But, the Atlantean people were experts at like math and technology and very telepathic. Okay. And this was in the beginning of the Atlantean times. Now, Lemuria, certainly some of the Lemurians came in the beginning, and that was when the land of Lemurian went into the sea. And so the Atlanteans and the Lemurians lived very peaceful for many thousands of years. And then as the fall of Atlantis, there were lots of underground tunnels made, lots of underground experimentation being performed on Lemurians. People, there were some people, because of the different philosophies that Atlanteans made, the different thought systems that each of them made, that they had. There were some that really wanted to find out more about how the Lemurians ticked. How could the Lemurian, do this shape-shifting and live in such love and simplicity, whereas unfortunately what started happening is that they went underground and started doing these experiments on some of the animals, because of the animals at that time had a lot to offer in wisdom, in their meaning, in the way they behaved and stuff. We could all learn something from their ways. And so the animals were also very, very important. And because of that, and because of some who wanted to find out more about how others ticked, they started doing experiments. And I won't go into some of the stuff that I have read and have saw in my mind's eye, but in many instances, they took out, they would tie down a Lemurian and take out their third eye because they wanted to do some experimentation on that stone that was their third eye, and to figure out how they could shapeshift, because they wanted to make a better world. They did this because they wanted a better being. They started doing hybrids, and genetically engineering to make a better world. So towards the end of Atlantis, there were all sorts of hybrids walking around, all sorts of genetically engineered things going on, plants, animals, and much like it is today. So that's why in the beginning of this broadcast I said, you know what? Look around you. We are experiencing Atlantis in many forms of how it was towards the end of Atlantis. Now, something else that I saw this on a documentary one time about Atlantis is that the Nazis were really, really interested in Atlantis. They even did an expedition to to Tibet to find Atlantis. And they were really interested in that control aspect that the Atlanteans towards the end were really trying to facilitate, and to make the best person. Now remember, Atlanteans, they're very beautiful and very much in shape, and very bright, and a lot smarter than many, and very telepathic. So they were really, really bent on making the perfect civilization. So it makes me wonder, when are we going to get it that we are perfect in our every right as to exactly how we are born? We don't have to make ourselves perfect by getting cosmetic surgery or, anything that we do to try to change our way. It is an inside job. It is about loving ourselves, and, we don't have to be perfect, but that's kind of the world that we live in. So that's why it's important that we take responsibility for our own actions, and of our being really in tune with ourselves. So the Atlanteans, they had a lot of help, communication, very open communication from the different galaxies, the Arcturians, the Arcadians, the Syrians, the Pleiadians, I know I said that wrong, but anyway, the Pleiadians. So it's funny because I used to call it the Pleiadians for many years until someone corrected me, and it's like, you know what, maybe that's how I heard it in my telepathic mind, because when we used to communicate with them, we didn't have to talk, we just like telecommunicated. But yeah, Atlantis was huge, and lots of cities that had the pyramids, and the pyramids had the big giant crystals, and the power generators to help with the power. They were very computer and technologically sound and experts. So there was definitely some of that going on way back when. And, some people may question, well, why haven't we found some of this? And because of the high, the energy, they learn how to transport. They did learn how to, some of them learn how to, teleport and shapeshift like the Lemurians could do so well. So, there's because there are other levels of just the earth right now, just the third dimension. There are so many different dimensions that are going on right now that one day we will discover some of this technological stuff that goes on, that went on, that there is proof. When we really get more in touch with our inner beings and listen to our own intuition, we will be able to find those things on the etheric level, which way back when was a normal way. Like I said last week in the Lemurian section, that the chakra system was just like an organ, and it was really, really important to us to take care of our chakra system. So definitely something to really think about there. So towards the end of the fall, when the fall began of Atlantis, many Lemurians that were living in Atlantis, many of them and some of the Atlanteans moved into the sea. And they also would decide to, go into the land. So what I mean by that is that, like the Green Man today, or, when we're walking out in the forest and we see a face in the tree and stuff, how do we know that's not one of our beings from an Atlantean time, or an Lemurian from a Lemurian time, and they chose to become part of the landscape? I know this is very far-fetched to many of us, and there was a time when I would question it, but you know what? I've had so many dreams and so many meditations and memories that I know this to be true for myself. And people can think that I'm crazy. They can also think that I have a really vivid imagination. And just remember, when you use your imagination, that is when you could get some profound information on how you have been in a past, how you are. And when you use your imagination, you can definitely get more in tune with your inner self, your authentic self. All right? Okay. So, because of the Lemurians being so energized with technology and always wanting to make things better and change things, and they also, towards the end, got a little fearful, as we might get stuck in our egos if we're trying to change things, make things perfect, and get in fear of what others might be doing ahead of us. So there was like this race or this secrecy, and they, towards the end, banned everyone from having a choice As far as, remember the Lemurians, they had a choice whether they were male or female or androgynous. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a huge focus. Whereas towards the end of Atlantis, there was this, they started implementing rules and more rules. And one of the rules was that upon birth, you had to choose a sex. You had to, when you were born, you had to choose a sex. There was no freedom in that. They also started towards the end banning sex because they wanted to control the population, and they only wanted the higher ups to populate because they were in essence trying to make a perfect world. And this caused a lot of chaos, and it caused a lot of confusion as well. So what it also did was it closed down that DNA. So we had this loss of DNA that was so freely expressed before. And so there are some levels of DNA, and these are the levels that will encourage our intuitive abilities, that will help us teleport, that will help us shapeshift, that will help us on so many levels to feel more of that love, to feel more at one. They were shut down because there was this fear that started to happen. There was this control that started to happen in the last days of Atlantis. And so just now in the last several years, have we been able to, the last couple hundred years, if not more, I'm being told it was, more than 100 years ago, a couple hundred years ago, that we have started to awaken to the thought that there is other DNA that is within us that is just locked up. Now, some of the ways that we can unlock this, and we can unlock it and help our intuitive ways and help us raise our level of awareness and consciousness and getting to know more of our authentic self, is to unlock this DNA. Now, there were lots of elementals in Atlantis. Now, there were lots of elementals in Lemuria too, but in Atlantis, towards the end, there were all sorts, and there were hybrids and half. I don't know what that was. Half horse and half guy, the centaurs walking around. You saw all kinds of different beings, whether they were not hybrids or whether they were authentic, walking around. And the centaurs, they were used, they were like the school, the teachers, and so they taught in schools, and they helped the people with music and finding their talent and their creativity. And remember, because we were closing down that DNA aspect, that is kind of funny that we would have to go outside of ourselves to have somebody teaching us the creativity and stuff, which, in some aspects is happening today, with not being able to have recess or art in schools. And then, we have to be taught this somewhere else in a special class or a workshop or something. It's just silly, but don't get me started there. There was also the dragon fae, and the reason I'm touching base with some of the elementals is because of the DNA aspect. So the dragon fae, part fairy, part dragon, and they were very honest, and they would help people to unlock that DNA that we had lost. So if in today's right here, right now, if you want to, let's say you want to encourage your intuitive muscles, and you want to build your intuitive muscles, and you just feel, or you have this resonation of maybe something is so like stuck, and that your DNA is repressed, maybe the Dragon Fae will help unlock that. Now, because of the sex part that I mentioned a few minutes ago, towards the end of Atlantis, of even controlling the population and not wanting people to, reproduce, that has been actually carried on into this, where some people cannot have children because they have carried that piece of their DNA, and that aspect is locked. So, asking the Dragon Fae to come in and help you to unlock some of this DNA that is repressed is very helpful for us to get more in touch with our intuitive self. Dragons were, my nose is itchy. Dragons, very important as well. They were everywhere. They actually still are everywhere, even though we can primarily a lot of dragon energy and even people seeing dragons in the Asian countries more often. They are everywhere. We can see them etherically. Okay, so when we see something in our mind's eye, don't brush it off. Okay, yes, it is your creative juices. Yes, it is coming from your third eye, but there is something to it. Okay, and it's important to just acknowledge that. But dragons are definitely here and around us, but we many times it'll be very rare that we see them unless they show up in signs like a stuffed animal, or somebody talking about a dragon, or a TV show about a dragon, or something along those lines. But those are signs also that there is that dragon energy around. They are the keepers of the ley lines of the earth, and it's important to, even if it's just for kicks and giggles for you, and you don't believe in any of this, and you're just interested in, okay, what does someone have to say about Atlantis? And I don't know if I believe in all this, but what I encourage you to do is just for kicks and giggles, look into some of this stuff. It will help you get more in touch with your inner child. It will help you uncover some of your stuck patterns in life, in your human living life right now. And it's fun and it's creative. We are so serious in this day and age, and that's what Atlantis started to become, was too serious. And so, the Lemurians were there to help them not be so power motivated, and so technologically motivated, and so motivated to make things perfect. The Lemurians were there to say, hey, maybe it's perfect. This is the way that we are, and love each other unconditionally. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. About the dragons anyway. But there were lots of unicorns that walked around too during this time. And as the end started arriving for Atlantis, the unicorns, a lot of them went into the sea. So I find it very interesting, and it tickles me when I see artists create pictures of the unicorns dancing in the waves and running in the waves of the sea, because you know what? That's where they went. A lot of the unicorns, they definitely really, when they did start to come forth again, which we will talk about next week. Next week is Avalon Week, and the unicorns, they didn't necessarily keep their horn. And during the last days of Atlantis, the scientists and the different people that really wanted some of this magic, because the unicorns, they had very high vibration and very intuitive and really had a lot of magic to share, that they had to leave because a lot of the scientists were trying to get their horns, wherever their horn is. For some reason, I was putting it on my nose, but they were really wanting their horns. And I wish I could remember the name of, there is a whale. I'll find out and I'll put it in the chat room when this goes live. But there is a whale that has a horn that is believed to be of the unicorn. The unicorn gifted it to this whale to keep it safe and sound. So, yes, very much what I was going to say was next week, when we talk about Avalon, we're going to bring in the Pegasus. And the Pegasus is known to be a unicorn without the horn. Okay? So, thank you so much for listening to me today talk about Atlantis. And I just honor you. And I encourage you to follow your intuition, to follow your authentic self, and to continue to get to know your authentic self. I will see you next week. My name is Lacey Dawn Jackson, the Groovy Green Goddess, and you've been listening right here on 12radio.com. Woo!